He told his driver not to slow down. Not because he didn't see her, Kang Eryun saw everything, but because stopping was a kind of language. And in his world, every stop was a promise. Every promise was a weakness someone could pull on. The convoy kept moving. For years, that had been the rule. No detours, no interruptions, no strangers becoming problems. Kang liked the city best when it behaved like a screen outside tinted glass, soundless, distant, irrelevant. Then tonight, the convoy slowed anyway. Not for traffic, not for police, not for a rival. For a woman on the sidewalk. A young black woman, soaked through, folded into herself, her hand clamped over her mouth like she was trying to swallow her own pain. She wasn't waving for help. She wasn't even looking at the road. She was crying like she didn't expect anyone to stop. Kang watched for 1 second longer than he should have, and then he said very calmly, "Stop." Hazard lights blinked alive down the line. Engines idled. The city suddenly had to look at them. Black SUVs and sedans, headlights carving the rain into white blades. Vittore Calzoni stepped out first, tall in an Italian long coat, lifting an umbrella over Kang's head like a shield. Kang walked past the umbrella into the rain, and the moment his shoes hit the wet pavement, every man around him understood what was happening. Because Kang Eryun didn't stop for strangers. So if he was stopping now, it meant she wasn't a stranger anymore.
Before we continue, I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far these stories are traveling. And welcome to the Korean Boss Diaries. Now, let's go back to the moment just before Kang stepped into the storm, before the convoy lights, before the choice that would start a war.
Earlier that night, Kang's schedule had been perfect. Meetings timed to the minute. 2 calls, 1 quiet dinner he didn't taste, a brief stop at a rooftop office where the city looked small enough to control. His man liked him best on nights like that, nights when he was nothing but order. Vittore had asked casually as they left the building, "Do you want the alternate route? Less foot traffic." Kang didn't even look up from the tablet in his hand. Same route. Because Kang hated unpredictability. He hated mess. He hated emotion most of all, the kind that leaked into decisions. That's why he didn't notice Jamila at first, not as a person, just as an interruption in the rain. But when the headlights hit her face, when he saw the way her shoulders shook, the way she pressed her mouth like she was trying not to make noise, something in Kang's chest shifted. Not sympathy, not softness, recognition. Like he'd seen that exact posture before, right before someone disappeared. Kang put the tablet down. He sat very still. And then he gave the order that none of his men expected. "Stop." Kang Eryun did not believe in accidents. Everything that happened in his world was the result of a choice someone made somewhere, usually a bad one. That belief had kept him alive long enough to become the kind of man whose name made conversations stop. Rules had built that life. The first rule was simple: never slow down. Not on the road, not in business, not for anyone who wasn't already inside the circle of people he had chosen to protect. Kang learned that rule before he was old enough to drive. Years ago, when he was still new to power, one of his drivers had made the mistake of stopping for a man on the roadside. The man had been limping, waving for help, his car hood lifted like a white flag. Inside the black sedan, Kang had said nothing. He had watched the driver pull over. 30 seconds later, the roadside man reached into the open window, not for help, for a gun. Kang remembered the sound more than the moment itself, the sharp crack of the weapon and the way the driver's body collapsed against the wheel. Kang had taken control of the situation quickly. The man never made it 10 steps away. But the lesson had stayed. Mercy in Kang's world was often just another disguise for someone else's weapon. After that night, the rule became absolute. The convoy never stopped. His men knew it the way soldiers knew gravity. The lead SUV kept a constant distance from the next car. The drivers watched mirrors more than they watched the road ahead. Routes were memorized, rehearsed, and changed only when Kang himself said the word. And Kang rarely said anything. He preferred silence. Silence meant things were working. In silence, the city moved around him like weather, visible but unimportant. When he sat in the back seat of the sedan, his posture was always the same, one hand resting loosely near his knee, the other occasionally turning a page on the tablet he carried everywhere. Numbers, schedules, quiet updates from people who knew better than to waste his time. He never asked personal questions. He never invited conversation. Even Vittore Calzoni, who had been at Kang's side for nearly 6 years, spoke only when necessary. Attachment complicated things. Kang had learned that lesson the harder way. People who cared too much became predictable. Predictable people became targets, and targets didn't last long in the world Kang controlled. So he kept his distance from everything that could soften a decision. No detours, no emotional impulses, no strangers becoming responsibilities. That was the rule. The city outside the tinted glass could cry, argue, celebrate, fall apart. It made no difference. Kang's world moved through it without touching it. At least, that was how it had always worked, until the night the convoy slowed down. Until the moment a single figure on a rain-soaked sidewalk made Kang look up from the quiet order of his screen and see something he hadn't planned for, a problem that wasn't supposed to exist. And for the first time in years, Kang Eryun did something that broke his own rule. Jamila had been walking for almost an hour before the rain began to fall hard enough to blur the city lights. At first, it had only been a drizzle, thin drops that barely touched the pavement, but the clouds above the skyline had thickened quickly, and now the rain came down in long silver lines, bouncing off the broken sidewalk and soaking through the thin jacket she wore. She didn't stop. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant panic. Her shoes were slipping slightly on the wet pavement, her breath uneven from the way she kept looking over her shoulder. Not constantly. She had learned enough tonight to know that obvious fear attracted attention, but often enough that her neck ached from the tension. The street she had turned onto was quieter than the others. Most of the buildings were dark. A liquor store sign flickered across the road, the buzzing neon light throwing strange shadows onto the wet asphalt. Jamila slowed. Only for a moment. Her hand pressed against her mouth as another wave of emotion pushed up from her chest, threatening to escape as sound. She tried to swallow it. Crying loudly was dangerous. Tonight had taught her that much. But the tears came anyway. They slid down her face, mixing with rainwater until she couldn't tell the difference between them. Her shoulders trembled as she leaned against a rusted streetlight pole, trying to steady her breathing. Just a minute, she told herself. Just 1 minute to breathe. Because everything that had happened in the last 2 hours felt unreal. The music. The voices behind the door, the name she had heard spoken in a low voice, followed by another name she recognized from the news, and the sound that came next, not shouting, not arguing, a gunshot. Jamila squeezed her eyes shut as the memory flashed again. She hadn't meant to hear any of it. She hadn't meant to see the men leaving that office, their faces calm in a way that made the situation feel even worse. But one of them had noticed her. That was the moment everything changed. The look he gave her wasn't confusion, it was calculation, like he was deciding whether she mattered enough to eliminate. Jamila had run before he could finish that thought, down the stairs, out the back exit, through 2 streets she didn't recognize, and into the rain that was now soaking through her clothes. She had kept moving, because standing still meant they could find her, because men like that didn't let witnesses walk away. And now she didn't know where to go. Her phone was dead. Her friends would ask questions she couldn't answer. The police might already belong to the people she had just seen. The thought made her stomach twist. Jamila pressed her hand harder against her mouth as another sob tried to escape. The rain kept falling. Cars passed occasionally on the road ahead, headlights cutting across the darkness before disappearing again. None of them slowed. No one noticed the young woman standing under a broken streetlight, shaking in the storm like someone whose world had just split open. At least, not yet. The first sign that something was different came from the lead SUV. Its brake lights flared red against the rain, glowing through the downpour like a warning. One by one, the vehicles behind it slowed in perfect sequence, engines lowering to a quiet rumble as the convoy eased to a stop along the curb. Inside the sedan at the center of the formation, Kang Eryun lifted his eyes from the tablet in his hand. He had already seen her. He just hadn't decided yet whether she mattered. Through the rain-streaked window, Jamila looked small against the empty sidewalk. Her shoulders shook slightly, the dim streetlight catching the shine of water on her face. For a moment, she looked less like a person and more like a fragile outline. Someone who had wandered too close to a world that didn't make room for mistakes. Kang studied her the way he studied everything else, quietly, without emotion. His driver shifted in his seat. "Sir?" The word hung in the car like a question that had already been answered many times before. Keep moving. That was the rule. Kang didn't respond immediately. Outside, Jamila turned her head slightly, reacting to the sudden presence of headlights cutting through the rain. The convoy was impossible to ignore now, black SUVs and sedans stretching down the curb, hazard lights blinking in patient rhythm. For a moment she froze. Then she looked away again, as if she had already learned that help was not something people like her could expect. Kang closed the tablet. The soft click of the case snapping shut sounded unusually loud in the quiet car. "Stop," he said. The driver blinked once, almost imperceptibly, but obeyed without hesitation. Doors opened down the line of vehicles. Men stepped out into the rain. Vittore Calzoni emerged first from the SUV ahead, his long coat darkening instantly under the storm. In one smooth motion, he raised a large black umbrella and moved toward Kang's door. When Kang stepped onto the pavement, Vittore angled the umbrella above him with practiced precision. "Sir," Vittore said quietly, his voice low beneath the rain, "we can handle this." Kang didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the woman under the streetlight. Jamila noticed him only when his footsteps reached the edge of the sidework. She flinched instinctively, her body tensing as if she expected accusation, or worse. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain slid down Kang's jacket, darkening the charcoal fabric. Vittore adjusted the umbrella slightly, keeping the water from touching him. Kang reached up and pulled the jacket from his shoulders. The motion made Vittore pause. So did the men watching from the vehicles. Kang stepped forward and draped the jacket around Jamila's shoulders, not hurriedly, carefully, like someone placing a blanket around a person who had been standing too long in the cold. Jamila's breath caught as the warmth of the fabric settled around her. The scent of clean wool and faint cologne replaced the smell of rain and asphalt. She looked up at him then, really looked, and the expression she saw on Kang Eryun's face was not what she expected. Not anger, not suspicion, something steadier. Behind them, the convoy stood silent under the flashing hazards. Every man present understood what had just happened. Kang Eryun had stopped his entire operation for a stranger in the rain, and in a world like his, a decision like that was never small. For a moment, Jamila didn't move. The coat around her shoulders felt impossibly warm after the cold rain. The fabric was heavy, expensive, unfamiliar, like something that belonged in a world she had never been part of. Her fingers gripped the edge of it instinctively. Kang Eryun stood in front of her, rain falling quietly beyond the reach of Vittore's umbrella. Up close, his presence was heavier than it had seemed from the road. Not loud, not threatening in the obvious way, but controlled in a way that made the air around him feel organized, like chaos simply didn't belong near him. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost quiet enough to disappear under the rain. Jamila shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered, though the word trembled on the way out. Kang watched her carefully. Her breathing was uneven. Her eyes kept moving, not wildly, but with the sharp awareness of someone who expected something to appear behind them at any moment. Fear like that didn't come from nothing. "You're running," Kang said. It wasn't a question. Jamila's shoulders stiffened. For a second it looked like she might deny it, but something about the stillness of the man in front of her, something about the fact that he had already stepped into the rain for her, made the lie die before it reached her mouth. They're looking for me," she said quietly. Vittore shifted slightly behind Kang, his posture tightening. Kang didn't react. "Who?" he asked. Jamila hesitated. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the line of vehicles behind him, men standing beside black SUVs, rain sliding off their shoulders, their attention alert but silent. People who looked like they belonged to him, which meant they were dangerous too. "You don't want to get involved," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to see anything. I wasn't supposed to be there." Kang said nothing. Jamila swallowed. "It was an office," she continued, voice shaking now, "on the 9th floor of the building behind Market Street. I was cleaning, late shift." The rain seemed to grow louder around them. "I heard voices," she said. "Two men arguing. One of them said a name." Her fingers tightened around the coat. "Councilman Hargrove." Behind Kang, Vittore went very still. Jamila noticed the reaction and rushed forward with the rest of the truth. "There was a ledger on the desk. Payments, dates, names. I took a picture because something felt wrong. I thought maybe it was illegal. I didn't know someone was going to die." The words hung between them. Kang's eyes darkened slightly. "Someone did," he said. Jamila nodded weakly. "A man in the room. They shot him like it was nothing." Her breath hitched. "One of them saw me when they came out." Kang understood the rest without hearing it. Witness, the worst possible thing to be. Jamila slowly pulled her phone from her coat pocket. The screen was cracked, water speckled, but it still turned on. She held it out with trembling hands. On the screen was a photograph of a ledger page, names, numbers, and at the top, written clearly enough to read even in the rain, Councilman Arthur Hargrove. Kang looked at it once. Then he looked at Jamila again. This was no longer a stranger in the rain. This was evidence, an evidence against a man who controlled half the city's political machinery. which meant the people chasing her weren't just criminals, they were protected. Kang closed the phone gently in her hand. When he spoke again, his voice was even quieter. "You're right," he said. "This just became my problem."
Tell them they're already too late.
The convoy did not stay on the street long after Jamila handed Kang the phone. Within seconds, the quiet choreography of Kang Eryun's security moved into motion. Doors closed, engines turned over. Vittori guided Jamila into the rear seat of the central sedan, keeping the umbrella angled until the last possible moment before shutting the door against the rain. Inside, the warmth of the car wrapped around her like a second coat. Jamila sat stiffly, Kang's jacket still around her shoulders, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the convoy began to move again. No one spoke. Outside, the rain continued to wash the city clean. For several blocks, everything felt normal. Then Vittori's voice came quietly through the front. "We have company." Kang didn't look up immediately. His gaze rested calmly on the dark street ahead. "Where?" "2 vehicles back," Vittori said. "Gray sedan. It turned when we did." Jamila's fingers tightened against the fabric of the coat. Kang lifted his eyes toward the side mirror. The sedan was easy to spot once you knew where to look. It kept its distance carefully, never close enough to be obvious, never far enough to disappear completely. Professional. Procedure began to lay overlays onto the rear. "Second car," Vittori continued. "Blue SUV, joined 2 lights ago." Jamila felt her stomach drop. "They found me," she whispered. Kang's expression didn't change. "Not yet," he said, but the silence that followed suggested it was only a matter of time. The convoy shifted smoothly through the next intersection. The lead vehicle accelerated slightly, testing the distance. The gray sedan matched the movement. Confirmation. Vittori exhaled slowly through his nose. That didn't take long. Kang leaned back slightly in his seat, the calm in his posture almost unsettling. When something valuable disappears, people start looking. Jamila stared at the passing lights outside the window. "I told you," she said. "You shouldn't have stopped." Her voice carried the weight of certainty. Kang didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached forward slightly, tapping the back of the driver's seat once. A small signal. The convoy adjusted again. 2 vehicles slid closer to the sedan's rear position, forming a tighter shield around the center car. The gray sedan stayed behind them, watching. A moment later, Vittori's phone vibrated softly in his hand. He glanced down at the screen. Then he gave a small, humorless smile. "That didn't take long either," he said. Kang looked at him. "Speak." Vittori turned the phone so Kang could see the message. No number, just a short line of text. "A witness doesn't belong to you." Another message followed immediately. "Return the girl and we'll forget you stopped tonight." Jamila's breath caught. Vittori looked up again. "Friendly warning," he said dryly. Kang studied the message for a moment. Then he leaned back into the seat, his voice calm enough to make the threat seem almost boring. "Reply." Vittori's thumb hovered over the screen. "What should I tell them?" Kang glanced once toward the rain sliding down the window beside Jamila. Then he spoke. "Tell them," he said quietly.
Tell them they're already
They're
too late.
already too late. The safe house did not look like a place meant for protection. From the outside, it was just another narrow building wedged between 2 quiet storefronts on a street that had already gone dark for the night. No signs, no security cameras visible from the sidewalk, no lights on in the upper windows, which was exactly the point. The convoy disappeared into the underground entrance beneath the building, engines echoing softly against concrete as the vehicles rolled to a stop one by one. When Jamila stepped out of the sedan, the air inside the garage felt strangely calm compared to the chaos of the rain outside. Too calm. Men moved quietly around the vehicles, checking doors, scanning corners, communicating in brief murmurs that never rose above a professional whisper. This was a place designed to erase mistakes. Vittore led the way to a narrow elevator at the back of the garage. Kang followed a step behind Jamila, his presence steady but distant, close enough to protect, far enough that she could still feel the space between them. The elevator ride lasted less than 20 seconds. When the doors opened, the safe house revealed itself. A large, clean apartment, neutral colors, minimal furniture, a long window overlooking a silent street 3 floors below. The kind of place that looked temporary even when it wasn't. Jamila walked slowly into the room, Kang's coat still wrapped around her shoulders. "You can stay here for now," Kang said behind her. His voice carried the same controlled calm it always had. "There are security teams on both entrances. No one gets in without permission." Jamila turned toward him. "For how long?" "As long as the situation requires." The answer came instantly, efficient, clinical, like he was describing a logistics problem. Jamila watched him for a moment before speaking again. "You do this a lot?" she asked quietly. Kang didn't misunderstand the question. "Sometimes." "You rescue strangers in the rain and hide them in apartments?" "No," Kang said. Jamila let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Right." She walked toward the window, looking down at the empty street below. "You talk about this like it's paperwork," she said after a moment. Kang didn't respond. Jamila turned back toward him. "To you, I'm just evidence, a witness, a problem that needs to be stored somewhere safe until the situation is resolved." Kang's expression didn't change. "That's the practical reality." Jamila stared at him, disbelief flashing briefly across her face. "You wrapped your coat around me in the rain like you were saving someone," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "But now you're talking like I'm a file in a cabinet." The room fell quiet. Kang held her gaze evenly. "You're alive because I made a decision," he said. "Emotion had nothing to do with it." Jamila stepped closer. Rainwater still clung to the edges of her hair, the exhaustion in her eyes deeper now that the adrenaline had faded. "That's the part you're wrong about," she said softly. Kang didn't move. Jamila gestured toward the coat still around her shoulders. "You didn't stop tonight because it was efficient," she said. "You stopped because you saw me." Her voice lowered slightly. "And you can pretend this is all strategy if it makes you comfortable, but you can't save people the way you manage business." She paused, then said the words that settled heavily in the quiet room. "You can't save people like files, Kang."
Those aren't police.
The safe house stayed quiet for most of the night. Rain softened into a steady whisper against the windows, and the city beyond the glass sank into the dull glow of streetlights and wet pavement. Inside, the apartment held its carefully arranged stillness. Security men posted on the floors below, radios murmuring occasionally, the quiet rhythm of a place designed to wait. Jamila had fallen asleep on the couch sometime after 2. Not deeply, the kind of sleep that came from exhaustion rather than comfort, her shoulders still wrapped in Kang's coat, her breathing uneven as if her body hadn't fully accepted that she had stopped running. Kang hadn't slept at all. He stood near the window, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, watching the empty street the way he watched everything else, patiently, without hurry. Across the room, Vittore checked his phone again. "No movement," he said quietly. "The gray sedan left the district about an hour ago." Kang nodded once. It should have been reassuring, but something about the silence bothered him. Threats rarely disappeared that easily. The knock came at 3:18 a.m. Not loud, just firm enough to carry through the apartment. Jamila stirred immediately, sitting upright on the couch as confusion replaced sleep in her eyes. Vittore was already moving toward the door. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stepped beside the wall panel and checked the camera feed. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway outside. Rain still clung to their jackets. One of them held up a badge toward the camera. Vittore frowned. "Local police," he said, glancing toward Kang. "They say they're responding to a report of a witness tied to the Market Street shooting." Jamila went pale. Kang didn't move from the window. "Who called it in?" he asked. "They didn't say." Kang's gaze shifted slightly toward the door. "Ask them to identify the reporting officer." Vittore pressed the intercom. A brief conversation followed, low voices through the speaker. Then Vittore's expression changed. "Sir," he said slowly, "they're insisting on taking her in for protective custody." Jamila stood. "No," she said quickly, "that's not right." Her voice carried something sharper than fear. "Those men, they knew someone would call the police eventually. They said that earlier tonight." Kang turned toward the door. "Open the camera feed again." Vittore did. The 2 fake officers were still waiting outside, calm, professional. But Kang watched the screen longer than Vittore had. Then he saw it. The second officer's hand rested casually near his belt, too casually, and the holster on that belt wasn't standard issue. Kang's voice stayed calm. "Those aren't police." Vittore's head snapped toward the screen again. Outside, the officers shifted slightly in the hallway, waiting. Jamila's pulse hammered in her ears. "They found me," she whispered. Kang stepped away from the window. "No," he said quietly. "They tried." At that exact moment, Vittore's phone vibrated. He glanced down, then froze. "What?" Kang asked. Vittore slowly turned the screen toward him. Another message, different number, just 5 words. "Your house is full of holes." Before Kang could respond, the hallway camera flickered. For half a second, the image distorted, then returned. But the 2 fake officers were no longer alone. 3 more men had appeared behind them, and one of them was holding a key card to the safe house door, which meant someone inside Kang's world had just unlocked it for them. For the first time that night, Kang felt something unfamiliar shift beneath his calm. Not fear, something worse. A crack in the certainty that his system could not be breached. For a moment after the screen flickered, no one in the room moved. The image on the hallway monitor held steady now, 5 men instead of 2. The fake officers stood closest to the door, their posture relaxed in the way of people who believed the next move had already been decided. Behind them, one of the men held the key card. Vittore stared at the screen, his jaw tightening slightly. "Internal access," he said quietly. "That card shouldn't exist outside the network." Which meant someone had given it to them. Jamila felt the air change before anyone spoke again. The calm precision that had filled the safe house earlier had shifted into something harder, more dangerous. Kang watched the monitor without blinking. For years, he had built his world on control, on systems that closed every door before a threat could reach it. Safe houses, loyal men, careful routes. all of it built on one assumption, that the structure could not be broken from inside. The key card in the stranger's hand said otherwise. Another vibration came from Vittore's phone. He didn't need to read the message aloud. Kang already understood the language of threats. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take Jamila. Kang stepped away from the monitor. "Time," he said calmly. Vittore checked his watch automatically. Less than 30 seconds before that card opens the door. Jamila's heartbeat pounded in her chest. "You said this place was secure," she whispered. "It was," Kang replied. His voice carried no panic, only clarity. Then he turned toward Vittore. "Call them." Vittore hesitated for a fraction of a second. "You're certain?" Kang met his eyes. "Yes." Vittore nodded once and stepped aside, already dialing a number that almost no one used unless something had gone terribly wrong. Outside the apartment door, the first beep of the keycard sounded faintly through the hallway. Inside, Kang moved toward the table near the window and picked up the phone Jamila had shown him earlier. The photograph of the ledger still glowed faintly on the cracked screen. Councilman Arthur Hargrove. Money trails, names, dates. Political protection wrapped around criminal operations like armor. Kang studied the image once more. Then he made a decision. "Send the file," he told Vittore. Vittore lowered the phone slowly. "To who?" Kang slipped Jamila's phone into his pocket. "To everyone." Vittore understood immediately. The alliances Kang had maintained for years, quiet deals with people who preferred their influence to remain invisible, would collapse the moment that evidence reached the wrong eyes. Political offices, federal investigators, journalists who would burn the story across every screen in the city. It would drag powerful people into daylight, and it would mark Kang as the man who had done it. War. Vittore exhaled slowly. "Once that goes out," he said, "there's no pulling it back." "I know." The final beep sounded at the door. The lock released with a sharp metallic click. Kang turned toward Jamila. For the first time since she had met him, the calm in his eyes held something else beneath it. Resolve. "You wanted honesty earlier," he said quietly. Jamila didn't speak. Kang looked once toward the door that was beginning to open. "I didn't stop tonight because it was efficient." He stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the hallway. "I stopped because leaving you there would have been the first decision I regretted in a long time." The door swung inward, and Kang Eryun chose war.
Threat contained. All clear.
The first man through the door barely made 2 steps into the apartment. Kang moved before the moment fully formed, his hand catching the intruder's wrist and redirecting the weapon downward with a sharp, efficient twist. The gun clattered across the floor, sliding toward the wall. Behind him, Vittore's men appeared from the hallway like shadows that had been waiting for permission. The room filled with motion, fast, controlled, brutal in its precision. It ended almost as quickly as it began. 30 seconds later, the apartment was quiet again. 2 of the men who had entered were on the floor, groaning and disarmed. The others had already been forced back into the hallway, pinned under the quiet authority of Kang's security team. Jamila stood frozen near the couch, watching the aftermath unfold. Her heart was still racing, but the danger had shifted. Not gone, just contained. Kang adjusted the sleeve of his shirt as if he had just finished a minor inconvenience. His expression returned to the same calm stillness she had seen earlier in the night. "Secure them," he told Vittore. Vittore nodded once and began giving quiet instructions to the men outside. Within minutes, the hallway was clear. Phones were taken, weapons removed. The fake officers no longer looked confident. One of them tried to speak. "You don't understand who you're interfering with." Kang stopped him with a small gesture. I understand exactly, he said. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. Councilman Hargrove built a network that depends on silence. Witnesses disappear, reports get buried. People like you make sure the machine keeps moving. The man said nothing. Kang continued calmly. But that machine stopped working about 10 minutes ago. Vittore re-entered the room, phone still in hand. It's everywhere now, he said quietly. Every newsroom, every federal contact, every political rival Hargrove has. Kang nodded once. The ledger photograph had already done what bullets couldn't. Exposure. The councilman's protection was built on secrecy. The moment the information spread beyond his control, the network protecting him would begin collapsing under its own weight. No quiet cover-ups, no witnesses disappearing, too many eyes watching. The man on the floor understood it too. His confidence drained slowly as the reality settled in. "You just started a war," he muttered. Kang looked at him evenly. "No," he replied. "I ended a business arrangement." He turned away. Across the room, Jamila was watching him carefully. The adrenaline had faded from her expression now, replaced by something more complicated. "You burned your own alliances tonight," she said quietly. "Yes. You didn't have to." Kang considered that for a moment. "No," he agreed. Jamila pulled the coat tighter around herself. "Why?" Kang looked toward the window. The rain had stopped. Outside, the streetlights reflected off wet pavement, the city slowly returning to its usual rhythm. "Because I realized something," he said. Jamila waited. "For years, my rule was simple. No stops, no strangers, no attachment." He glanced back at her, and that rule kept me alive. Jamila studied him. "And now?" Kang's voice remained calm. "Now the rule has changed." Jamila stepped a little closer, though not too close. "Changed how?" Kang held the door open as Vittore escorted the captured men down the hallway. The apartment felt quieter with them gone. "Now," Kang said, "I stop when it matters." Jamila looked at the open doorway, then back at him. The night had not magically become safe. His world was still dangerous, complicated, but it was honest now. She took a slow breath. "I'll stay," she said. Then she added carefully, "But I don't belong to your world." Kang nodded once. "I know." The door remained open. Outside, the storm had passed. And for the first time that night, the city felt still.